What's going on in this town?
But there's something out there.
Let's split up, look for any survivors, and get out of here.
Help me!
Everyone's gonna die!
In 1998, Raccoon City died. Over the course of a few short days, the small, placid mountain town rotted from the inside out, transforming into hell on Earth. But despite how many years have passed since those tragic events transpired, people just can't seem to forget about it. Even with all the subsequent and even more cataclysmic biohazard outbreaks, the Raccoon City incident and its handful of fortunate survivors persist in infamy. And now, Raccoon City has been remade from the ground up, and all of the gruesome monstrosities that devoured it the first time have returned along with it. There may be plenty of people who are eager to discover what's been changed and what stayed the same, but those who are brave enough to uncover it all might just find themselves transformed by the time they're through. After over 20 years, it's finally time to complete the remake of Resident Evil 2.
Here comes a new challenger!
Yes!
Danger!
Welcome to the Completionist, where we don't just beat the games, we complete them. And this week, I'm completing a game I never thought I'd get the chance to. Back in 2002, Capcom released the remake of the original Resident Evil, proving that classic survival horror can be sustained and improved upon. It seemed like the remake of the second game in the series was inevitable, just right around that corner. But that's not what happened. Instead, the series began a process of metamorphosis that would eventually redefine what Resident Evil truly was. With game after game of action-oriented Resident Evils, the potential second remake went from what seemed like an inevitability to an afterthought to an impossibility. And it was one game in particular that drove that first big nail right into the coffin.
Resident Evil 4 was so good that its very existence felt like the death knell of classic Resident Evil. Aside from a few familiar elements, RE4 seemed like a Resident Evil in name only. The eerie, pre-rendered backgrounds and tank controls were all gone. The usual undead and mutated ghouls were absent as well. But none of that mattered. RE4 was incredibly well made, incredibly well received, and it was going to set the franchise's tone for the foreseeable future. Subsequent titles focused more on action, and eventually the Resident Evil franchise lost most of its correlation with survival horror, and came to be associated with this. And then, almost as if it came out of nowhere, there was Resident Evil 7. It shifted the franchise into even more strange new directions, but at the same time, it also harkened back to the terror of the franchise's nascency. Suddenly, Resident Evil was terrifying again, and that long-dead hope of a full-fledged return to Raccoon City began stirring in its grave once again. It didn't take long after that. The remake of Resident Evil 2 was confirmed, and it had the potential to be something truly nightmarish. All the unique flavors of horror and fear-sowing techniques the series has been experimenting with over the years had the chance to be utilized to their fullest extent right here in the return to Raccoon City. Resident Evil 2 is a true return to form, with gameplay that forces players to scavenge for supplies and solve cryptic puzzles as they fight their way past hordes of the undead. And it, once again, tells the story of a few lonely survivors desperately trying to escape from a city of the dead. Unfortunately for them, this remake marks one of the most, if not the most, terrifying Resident Evil experiences ever created. Things used to be a lot simpler. Resident Evil players used to only be able to see things exactly the way they were meant to be seen, with fixed camera angles controlling how we were encountering the horror. Now that Resident Evil has moved away from those fixed angles, we are now in control of what we see, and that power can be paralyzing. Now we have to choose how to take those corners, because there might just be someone waiting for us around the bend. And now we have the power to stop at any time and look behind us, just in case there's someone following us. This freedom isn't a new thing for the RE series, but it is the first time we've been burdened with that freedom while trapped inside an environment as eerie and haunting as the Raccoon City Police Department. RE2's setting is a big part of why it's so beloved, and its reimagining, as well as the reimagining of several elements of the original version, is what makes this remake rank amongst the most unsettling games in the series. There was only so much detail that could be rendered in the original station's chambers and corridors, but now that players are able to get intimately close to every corner of this location, every aspect of it has been rendered in horrifying detail. From the obvious, like the gory hallways filled with the grisly corpses of the recently murdered, to the not so obvious, like the heartbreaking hand-scrawled notes posted around the RPD that were written by the doomed. These nefarious renovations even extend to the late game locations, which usually feel obligatory and habitually lack the atmosphere of their early game counterparts. But in this remake, the underground and laboratory sections are almost as creepy as the station itself, and that's a rather impressive feat, especially when you consider how many moments of dread and paranoia in this game don't even involve enemies. Some of Resident Evil 2's scariest instances just involve you, a little mood lighting, maybe a far-off sound, and your own imagination. I swear, I remember these areas being far more lit up in the original game, but now, even the shadows are out to get you. We probably feel that fear because the characters clearly feel that fear. It's kind of a shock to see these veteran Resident Evil characters look so youthful and inexperienced after all these years. Our main characters appear very young, making their plight seem all the more tragic. The facial animations and voice performances are so believable that players can't help but relate to their peril and pain, and that doesn't just go for the members of the living. The zombies as well feel more real than ever. For the very first time in the series, it feels like you can really see the humanity trapped behind their lifeless eyes, reminding you of the person they used to be. They no longer seem like just featureless fodder for your bullets. Sometimes they feel like people, and hesitating when confronting one can get you into some serious trouble. It's far harder to juke past these zombies than the old school ones, and these undead seem far more unpredictable. Just when you think you figured out how one moves, they'll lurch forward, avoiding your headshot, or worse. It feels like the lickers are more lethal than ever as well. In the past, they seem like no more than a mere nuisance. But now, each licker you encounter is a potential disaster. These things are extremely fast and can take you down in the blink of an eye. If you find yourself next to one, you can pump round after round into it, praying that it doesn't reach you. You can spend some of that high quality ammo to ensure its demise, or you can slowly and carefully sneak by it since it's technically blind, leading you to some genuinely tense moments. Eventually, you will know the layout of the station so well that you can plan your trips around them and just about everything else in the building. And then he shows up.
Jesus Christ!
The most terrifying element of Resident Evil 2, and the facet that will haunt you long after the game is turned off, is Mr. X himself. He used to be a novelty, popping up at predetermined moments throughout one of the two campaigns. He'd maybe stalk you from one particular room to another, but he was entirely predictable. Now, he's been made into an unstoppable force that will hound you across the entire RPD station. He's deceptively quick, he's inhumanly strong, and there are few places he can't follow. When it comes to tenacity and unpredictability, he even puts Nemesis to shame. Just as you begin to master the police station, he shows up to remind you just how helpless you really are. It's no surprise that he's everyone's new favorite feature in this remake. He epitomizes this game's success at its core mission, authentically recreating the past while also augmenting it with terrifying results. And that theme of violent transformation, which is so strongly represented here, and which has been with the series since the very beginning, is what makes this Resident Evil seem so chilling. In fact, it's such an effective technique that I couldn't help but be hungry for even more new profane interpretations of the familiar. Far more than the game ended up delivering. The remake of Resident Evil 2 is an incredible recreation of a piece of survival horror history, and it satisfies in almost every way. Almost. At several opportunities, this game falls prey to one of the most common remake traps, remaining too faithful to the source material. Make no mistake, this game is a modern masterpiece, and I'll admit that most of my disappointment probably stems from overinflated expectations, but it still feels like there were several opportunities to improve upon the past or invent new material that simply went unanswered, such as the narrative. I don't think anyone would ever claim that the stories in Resident Evil games are anything special. They're usually schlocky vehicles for fear and adrenaline. And while the story in this game isn't any different, I can't help but feel that some details don't quite seem right. For instance, I don't think it's very believable for Sherry to be so happy-go-lucky after living through the nightmares of the previous night. She should be in shock at the very least. And then there are the details that are unexplained and unexplored, like the mayor's dying daughter on the table. Sure, things like this are all explored more in files you find throughout the game, but if it's important enough to be featured so prominently, maybe it should be more important to the narrative. Even the recently released Ghost Survivors DLC, which we'll cover in a later video, apparently doesn't offer any more narrative insight, despite the fact that it seems like the perfect place to do so. I'm not asking for Resident Evil to deliver the best stories, and while the narrative is perfectly passable here, I just wish it weren't so sloppy. I can't help but feel the same way about the lack of continuity between the A and B scenarios. Just like in the original RE2, playing through the first scenario will unlock the ability to play through the second one, which is supposed to offer a glimpse at what character B was up to during the events of character A's run through the first campaign. Traditionally, these two scenarios were never perfectly congruous. If someone picked up the spade key in the A scenario, the other character was going to have to pick it up somewhere too. But this remake was the perfect chance to ensure that the events of these two scenarios never conflicted with one another. Imagine collecting a first aid spray as Leon, only to find that same spray missing when you go to grab it as Claire. Imagine taking out a specific enemy and finding that same enemy's corpse lying in the same spot in the second scenario. Imagine two completely distinct campaigns with separate boss fights and separate puzzles. Then again, imagining the way things could be is probably why I'm disappointed right now. There are key differences between the two scenarios, and they're both fantastic and definitely worth replaying. But there aren't nearly enough distinctions when you consider what they could have done with this remake. Some of the strongest material in the remake of the original Resident Evil was the addition of Lisa Trevor, a brand new monster whose tragic origins you uncover over the course of the game. Exploring the all-new disturbing locations dedicated to her were some of the most memorable moments of that remake, and I was hoping for more moments like that here in the remake of Resident Evil 2. There's a never-before-seen orphanage area in this game, and when I got there, I was ecstatic. For once, there was absolutely nothing I could anticipate, and while its environment is exquisitely creepy, your time spent there is tragically short. I don't think I was alone when I hoped to explore even more of the chaotic streets of Raccoon City, but there's not much of that either. Instead, it mainly sticks to the original's blueprint. But then there's this walkway, which seems perfectly innocuous. But longtime fans of the Resident Evil series will know that something is missing. This used to be the final resting place of the zombified member of STARS, Brad Vickers. Now all that's there is a poster alluding to him. It's appreciated, but I can't help but wonder why he's not there at all. All the other Easter eggs throughout the game are greatly appreciated, but I can't figure out why they would remove special features like Brad that made the original version feel special. But as I said, all these criticisms are nitpicks at the most. The fact that I'm complaining about such ultimately unimportant things is a testament to how much went right in this game. This is the glorious return of classic Resident Evil, complete with the horror that it was once known for. But as it turns out, if you're completing Resident Evil 2, that horror doesn't last very long. For completionists, that terror is quickly transformed into other types of fear that are just as potent. If you play enough Resident Evil 2, you will eventually become well acquainted with the ins and outs of the game. And it's hard to be truly afraid of something you're so familiar with. It's just natural, and that fear melts away even faster when you're going for a good ranking. Just like in most classic REs, this remake grades you on your performance during the campaign. The only thing it cares about is how much time you took. So if you're chasing that elusive S rating and the infinite ammo weapons that come along with them, you're basically going to have to learn to speedrun this game. No time to enjoy the atmosphere, no time to be afraid at all. You simply have to put all your knowledge of the game to use and run. You may be able to pause and check on your total playtime, but that doesn't stop a new type of fear from settling in. Doubt. Are you sure you're going fast enough? Should you reload that last save to try and improve your time? Will this entire run end up being a complete waste of time? I didn't notice it at first, but the switch from dread to stress was subtle and almost nefarious. Things even get worse with even the most difficult setting, appropriately titled Hardcore Mode. You're forced to use the classic ink ribbons in order to save your progress, and their spawn points replace other much needed items. And almost everything can take you down to danger status in one hit or just kill you outright. The consequences of your mistakes are at an all-time high, and you can't waste any time since the time limits for S ranks are all an hour shorter than their standard mode counterparts. But it turns out that S isn't even the top ranking. There's an S+, and it can only be achieved by fulfilling the S ranking time requirements and saving no more than 3 times. That means you have to choose the moments to save extremely carefully. Too late, you run the risk of getting killed and having to start all over again. Too early, and you might not have any saves left for the end game, where things get extremely dangerous. In my opinion, the best 3 save spots are right before each encounter with the monster known as G, or William Birkin, considering how unpredictable he is. But even still, knowing that you'll have to go so far back if you die or mess up your timing eats away at your confidence. Plus, you can't use any of the infinite ammo weapons if you want that S+ ranking. So it's just you and your mastery of the game versus time itself. Under normal circumstances, I'd be satisfied with obtaining 2 S+ hardcore rankings, one for Claire and one for Leon. But instead, I felt obligated to get 8 S+, all because of this little screen right here. It practically begs to be filled. So after several hours and dozens of failed attempts, that's exactly what I did. When you're completely consumed by your S+ attempts, things that were once sources of fear instead become mere nuisances. Most zombies just catch a round or 2 to the knee, just enough to stun them momentarily so you can rush past. Many healing items go completely ignored because if you're playing correctly, you will never need them. Even Mr. X isn't that intimidating anymore. If you want S+ in every slot on the result screens, you have to become so good at Resi 2 that you, the player, become the most dangerous creature roaming the halls. All in all, it took me roughly 4 playthroughs to become fully acquainted with this game, plus 8 more S+ runs, plus a couple more trips through the campaign to lock down select trophies and in-game achievements. There's one for beating the game without ever opening an item box, and another for finishing without ever using a healing item. But at that point, I had unlocked an infinite weapon or 2, so the experience wasn't exactly rough. And those weapons of mass destruction are very much indicative of how Resident Evil 2 rewards its players. If you make it through the fear, you get to let off some steam with some carnage, such as the 4th Survivor, a short action-based mode in which you play as Hunk, the last survivor of a squadron of Umbrella soldiers. It's unlocked after you beat either Leon or Claire's B scenario, and just like in the original Resident Evil 2, playing as Hunk has nothing to do with terror. Terror has left the building and has been replaced with pure adrenaline. The sheer volume of enemies and their cruel placements leave no room for flight, only fight. This mode truly feels like an arcade game, with no ability to explore and no items to discover and pick up. It's just one long, arduous fight from the depths of hell to safety. But once you make it out alive, the action is far from over.
Do you read?
Now this guy right here, this is Tofu. It's a walking, talking block of literal tofu that you unlock the ability to play as once you beat the 4th Survivor mission. Tofu's mode is virtually the same as Hunk's, except the only weapons that Tofu has are knives. This is Resident Evil 2 at its toughest, and in case the heavy metal music doesn't tip you off, it's silliest. While witnessing Tofu get cartoonishly large chunks ripped out of it, and hearing it shout in high-pitched Japanese, I realized that this mode is where the game goes flying off the rails. And that's okay. The time for fear has long since passed, and Tofu's run is great for a laugh. But Tofu isn't alone. Once you beat its run, you unlock 2 more members of the Tofu team, both with their own separate loadouts. And once you beat it with either of those 2, you unlock the last 2 additional members of the Soy Squadron, providing a lot of different ways to run your ass off. Thankfully, there aren't any rankings for the Tofu and Hunk runs. All you have to do is make it out alive, which is easier said than done. Spending so much time among all this excitement really put my first experiences with this remake into stark perspective. There's something truly special about those very first couple of playthroughs. The times in which you don't know what's around the next corner, and you don't know where the next save room is, and you don't know everything by heart are fleeting. Once those times are gone, you can never really get them back. Whether you're completing Resident Evil 2 or just trying it out, I recommend savoring those first few trips through RPD, because they'll be over before you even know it. Admittedly, you don't really earn anything for going above and beyond in Resident Evil 2. You don't get anything for getting every trophy, there's no reward for filling out all of the in-game records, and there's no bonus to be had for getting S+s across the board. But I am pleasantly surprised by how many things you do unlock during the completion process. Aside from the infinite weapons for obtaining S and S+ rankings, there are a couple of alternate costumes for Leon and Claire that are available after beating each of their A scenarios. These little treats feel kind of old school, which makes sense considering just how beholden to the past this game is. But to understand if Resident Evil 2 is worth completing, we'll have to take a good look at the body count. That comes out to 84 total deaths. Some were no big deal, but the ones that happened after not having saved for a while were particularly brutal. 8 S+s earned. Getting these made me a master at the game and redefined what fear meant to me. 14 total trips through the campaign. They were short, but some of them were extremely stressful. 42 trophies and 82 in-game records unlocked. These essentially acted as my completion checklist, and by the time the S+ and Tofu runs were done, the only things left were a cakewalk. 46 hours of total playtime, and one dream come true video game that was 20 years in the making.
It doesn't feel quite real yet, but classic Resident Evil is finally back, and I don't think I'm the only one who's happy about that. The game is extremely close to the dream remake that we've been hoping for, and I'm incredibly excited to see more reimaginings of classic REs in the future. Now, this game isn't perfect by any means, but it is a perfect way to get your fix of fear and survival horror. The amount of S+ runs needed to complete this game aren't quite worth it, but just about everything else is. So, with that in mind, I give Resident Evil 2, the remake, my completionist rating of finish it.
Finish it!
That's all the time we have for today, guys, so please, as always, let us know what you liked about this episode in the comments down below. If you liked the video, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button to not miss out on any videos that we do. We do videos every Wednesday and Saturday. A big thank you to all of our folks over on Patreon who are supporting us. If you want, you can head over there right now to check out our new show, Board Boys, which is me and my friends playing board games. It's live on the Patreon right now. That's it, that's all, guys, and we'll see you next week for another brand new episode. And this was Remake Month. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you soon. Bye.